Welcome to our deep dive into how globalization is reshaping state sovereignty. Think of it like this. State sovereignty is kind of like a country's my way or the highway card. It's the idea that each country gets to call the shots within its own borders. But here's the thing about globalization, it doesn't really respect borders. Today, we'll explore 7 key areas where globalization has had a significant impact. Buckle up, because this is going to get complicated. Let's start with the most obvious way globalization messes with state sovereignty money, specifically trade. Countries used to be able to slap tariffs on imports like they were going out of style. But then came along these things called international trade agreements, and don't even get me started on the World Trade Organization, the WTO. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some definite perks to all this free trade, lower prices, more choices. But it also means countries have less control over their own economic policies. These multinational corporations are like the love children of Godzilla and a tax haven, powerful, elusive, and always hungry for more. So on the one hand, globalization can lead to economic growth. On the other hand, it can also lead to a situation where countries are basically forced to compete in a global race to the bottom. So we've established that globalization loves to muck about with a country's economic autonomy, but it doesn't stop there. Enter supranational organizations. We're talking about the big leagues here, folks, the United Nations, the European Union, the International Monetary Fund. These organizations promote cooperation, set international standards, and occasionally send sternly worded letters. But joining one of these clubs comes with a price, a little bit of your sovereignty. Pooling sovereignty, they say, allows for more effective decision-making on global issues. Others, however, worry that it undermines national interests and gives too much power to unelected bureaucrats. Speaking of things that don't respect borders, let's talk about global challenges. We're talking climate change, terrorism, pandemics, the whole shebang. These are the issues that keep world leaders up at night. And here's the thing about these global challenges, they don't really care about your national interests. A virus doesn't check your passport before infecting you. So what's a country to do? Well, they have to cooperate. They have to share information, coordinate responses, and sometimes even compromise their own policy preferences for the sake of the greater good. Of course, some countries are better at this whole cooperation thing than others. But the point is, globalization has made it abundantly clear that we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. Chapter 4, Human Rights, because even sovereign states need to be kept in check. Now let's talk about something a little less existentially terrifying than global pandemics. Human rights. Seems simple enough, right? Everyone deserves basic rights and freedoms, end of story. But of course, things are never that simple. Because what happens when a country decides to, shall we say, interpret those rights a little differently? Well, that's where international law comes in, armed with its strongly worded treaties and its stern-looking judges in flowing robes. See, over the years, the international community has come together to create a whole bunch of laws and norms designed to protect human rights, regardless of where you live. And these laws, they don't really care about your sovereignty. Globalization has created a situation where states are increasingly being held accountable for their actions, not just by their own citizens, but by the international community as a whole. Chapter 5. Cultural diffusion or cultural collision. Globalization's impact on values and norms. So far, we've mostly talked about the ways globalization messes with the serious official stuff, economics, governance, human rights. But globalization doesn't stop there. Oh no, it also likes to mess with the very fabric of a society, its culture. Thanks to globalization, you can now eat sushi in Scotland, listen to K-pop in Kansas, and watch Bollywood films in Brazil. The world is becoming increasingly interconnected, which is great if you like variety, but maybe not so great if you're really attached to your country's traditional way of life. Because here's the thing about cultural exchange, it's a two-way street. It's not just about sharing your culture with the world, it's also about the world sharing its culture with you. Now, is this cultural fusion a good thing or a bad thing? Honestly, it's probably a bit of both. Chapter 6, the Internet, where cats are gods and state control goes to die. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the cat video in everyone's pocket, the Internet. specifically how technology and communication technology in particular have thrown a giant wrench into the whole state sovereignty thing. See, back in the good old days, and by good old days I mean like 5 minutes ago, governments had a decent amount of control over information. But then the internet came along and suddenly everyone's a journalist, a commentator and a conspiracy theorist with a Wi-Fi connection. Information is flowing across borders faster than a herd of caffeinated squirrels, and governments are struggling to keep up. Social media in particular has been a thorn in the side of many a government. It's become a powerful tool for organizing protests, spreading dissent and exposing human rights abuses. But there's no denying that it's fundamentally changed the relationship between citizens and their governments, making it harder than ever for states to operate in the shadows. Chapter 7, People on the Move, Migration and the Sovereignty Balancing Act. Finally, let's talk about something that's been in the news a lot lately: migration. Specifically how the increasing movement of people across borders is forcing countries to confront some very real challenges to their sovereignty. It used to be that controlling your borders was relatively straightforward. You built a wall, you stationed some guards, you made it really clear that you weren't particularly fond of outsiders. Globalization has made it easier than ever for people to move around the world, whether it's for work, for study, or because they're fleeing conflict or persecution. And this influx of people can put a strain on a country's resources, its social services, and its sense of national identity. Globalization has created a situation where the well-being of your own citizens is increasingly intertwined with the well-being of people halfway across the world. And that, my friends, is the complex reality of globalization versus state sovereignty. Globalization versus state sovereignty. The saga continues. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of globalization's impact on state sovereignty. Globalization has brought about a lot of positive changes, but it's also created some serious challenges for state sovereignty. Ultimately, the key is finding a way to balance the benefits of globalization with the need for strong and effective states. After all, the world is a messy, complicated place, and the only way to make sense of it is to try to see it from all angles.